The night my son walked back into my life, I was sitting in a break room that smelled like burnt coffee and bad decisions, wearing a uniform that wasn't mine anymore. He sat down across from me like he'd done it 1,000 times before, calm, steady, like a man who had rehearsed this moment for years. And maybe he had. He slid a photograph across the table. A little boy, maybe 4 years old, standing next to a blue bicycle with a broken silver bell. I knew that bike. I knew that boy. I had spent 35 years trying to forget both of them. He looked at me and said, "I know what they did to you, and I know what they took." I wanted to tell him he had the wrong man, but God help me, I was afraid he had exactly the right one. Chapter 1. The night it all came back. The machines never sleep at the Golden Shore Casino. 2 in the morning, and the slot floor was still humming. Lights cycling through red and gold and blue, the mechanical chime of near misses filling the air like a language nobody had asked to learn. I'd worked the overnight security shift here for 4 years. I still hadn't gotten used to the sound. My name is Walter Briggs. 31 years on the Philadelphia Police Department. The last 8 as a lieutenant running organized crime liaisons. And here I was, walking a casino floor at 2 in the morning, in a blazer that didn't fit right, carrying a radio that crackled more than it worked. I want to be clear about something before I tell you what happened that January. I am not a man who believes in fate. I spent too many years working crime scenes to believe the universe has a plan. Bad things happen because people make bad choices, or because they're standing in the wrong place at the wrong time. Sometimes both. That's it. That's the whole story. At least, that's what I believed. Until a stranger sat down across from me in the employee break room and changed everything I thought I knew about the last 35 years of my life. I took my break at 2:15, same as always. The break room was a windowless box behind the surveillance suite. 2 folding tables, a coffee maker that produced something approximately coffee-colored, and a row of lockers that smelled like old regrets. I poured a cup, sat with my back to the wall out of habit, and pulled out my wallet. I did this every night. A ritual I had never been able to explain and had never tried to. I took out the photograph, small, worn soft at the edges, color faded from too many years of handling. And I looked at it for exactly as long as my break allowed. The boy in the photo was 6 years old, standing in front of a jungle gym at Fairmount Park in Philadelphia, wearing a blue winter coat his mother had bought 2 sizes too big so he could grow into it. He was laughing at something off camera, his left arm raised toward a bar above his head. On his left shoulder, visible above the collar of that blue coat, was a birthmark. Small and dark, shaped like a 5-pointed star. 1 in a million, the pediatrician had said the day Michael was born. You will never mistake him for anyone else. I put the photograph away when I heard the door open. The man who walked in was maybe early 40s, medium height, lean in the way of someone who stayed fit out of necessity rather than vanity. Dark hair going gray at the sides. He wore a charcoal jacket over a dark shirt and moved with a deliberate calm I recognized from years of watching people who had trained themselves not to show what they were feeling. He glanced around the room the way people do when they are cataloging exits. Then he walked directly to my table and sat down across from me without asking. I looked at him. "This table is not open," I said. He set both hands flat on the table. Deliberate, the way you show someone you are not holding anything. And looked at me with eyes that were tired in a way that went far beyond sleep. "Fairmount Park," he said quietly. "October 14th, 1990. A Tuesday afternoon. The boy was wearing a blue coat, too big for him. His mother was on the bench by the south gate." He paused. "Her name was Sandra. She was wearing a green scarf with a fringe on the ends. She called you at 4:17. You were on Broad Street, 20 minutes away. The coffee cup stopped halfway to my mouth. By the time you got there, he continued, his voice even and low, the park was already full of uniforms. You stood at the gate for a long time before you went in. You couldn't make yourself move. He looked at me directly. You blamed yourself. You still do. Every single day. I set the cup down. Slowly. Kept my face neutral, the way 31 years of police work had taught me to do when my chest was caving in. Who are you? I said. He reached into his jacket and placed a photograph on the table between us. Older than mine, the color drained nearly to sepia. A little boy, maybe 4 years old, sitting on an unfamiliar front stoop, squinting into afternoon sun. His left arm was raised, shielding his eyes. On his left shoulder, above the collar of a striped shirt, was a birthmark. Small. Dark. 5 points. My vision went sideways for exactly 1 second. I pulled it back. That could be anyone, I said. My voice had dropped to something I barely recognized as my own. The man reached up slowly, pulled the collar of his jacket aside, and drew down the neckline of his shirt, exposing his left shoulder. The birthmark was there. 35 years older, slightly faded at the edges the way skin changes with time, but unmistakable in its shape. 5 points, perfectly symmetrical. 1 in a million. The break room was very quiet. Beyond the door, the casino went on humming and chiming without any awareness that the ground had just opened up beneath a 63-year-old security guard who had spent 3 decades trying to find a boy who might be sitting 4 feet away from him. My name is James Cole, he said. I have been living in Newark for 11 years. Before that, I moved around. Before that, he stopped, drew a slow breath. Before that is a long story I am not ready to tell yet. He folded his jacket back into place, looked at me without blinking. I know what you are thinking, he said. You are thinking this is a con, that someone researched you, that the birthmark is makeup or coincidence or a very careful setup. You should think that. It is the smart call. It is what I would think if I were you. Then why are you here? I said. Something shifted in his expression. Not softened exactly. More like a door opened a crack and then caught itself before it could go any further. Because I have been watching you for 3 months, he said. And I am not the only one. Chapter 2. The Boy in the Blue Coat. I did not stand up. That surprised me, later, when I had time to think about it. 31 years as a cop, and my first instinct in any ambiguous situation had always been to get vertical. Get on my feet, establish physical presence, control the space. It was muscle memory so deep it had become reflex. But I did not stand up. I sat there, with my hands wrapped around a coffee cup that had gone cold, and looked at the man across from me and said, "What do you mean you're not the only one?" James Cole kept his hands flat on the table. Someone else has been watching you. Different schedule, different vehicle, but the same pattern. I noticed them about 6 weeks in. Professional, patient. He paused. Not law enforcement. The way they move is different. How would you know how law enforcement moves? Something passed across his face. Not quite a smile. Experience. I studied him the way I had studied 1,000 people across 1,000 tables, in interrogation rooms, and crime scenes, and courtrooms. The stillness in him was not natural. It was trained. The kind you develop when showing emotion has cost you something real. His jaw was set, but not clenched. His eyes were tired, but alert. He was not performing anything. Whatever he was not performing. Tell me something, I said. Something that is not in any file, not in any newspaper. Something only the people who were there would know. He was quiet for a moment. Outside the break room door, the casino hummed and chimed its indifferent music. "What was she wearing?" he said. I frowned. "Who?" "Sandra. That day. You said tell you something only the people there would know." He looked at me steadily. "So I am asking you first. What was she wearing?" I did not answer. Could not for a moment. "A gray sweater," I said finally. "And the green scarf. Jeans. Her brown boots, the ones with the buckle on the side." I stopped. "Why?" "Because I want you to know that I already know the answer," he said quietly, "before you ask me to prove anything else." That was the moment something cracked open in my chest. Not broke. Cracked. A hairline fracture in the wall I had spent 35 years building and reinforcing and patching over and building again. I need to tell you about October 14th, 1990. I was working a surveillance detail on Broad Street that afternoon, following a mid-level fence we suspected of moving stolen goods for a crew out of Kensington. It was routine work, the kind of slow, grinding patience that makes up 90% of police work and gets left out of every television show ever made about it. Sandra had taken Michael to Fairmount Park because he had been cooped up all week with a cold, and the sun had finally come out, and she said the fresh air would do him good. She called me at 4:17. I remember the exact time because I looked at my watch when the phone rang, an old habit, noting timestamps. And then I heard her voice and forgot everything else. She wasn't screaming. That was the thing that stayed with me longest, in all the years after. She was not screaming. She was speaking in a voice that was completely flat and completely destroyed at the same time, like something had reached inside her and switched off a light that could never be switched back on. "Walter," she said, "I can't find Michael." 20 minutes. That was all that stood between me and my son. 20 minutes of surface streets and red lights and a surveillance detail I should have handed off to my partner 2 hours earlier. By the time I got to the south gate of Fairmount Park, there were already 4 patrol units on scene. Sandra was sitting on the ground next to a bench with her arms wrapped around her knees. And Michael was gone. 35 years. That is how long I have been living in the 20 minutes I was not there. The investigation ran for 6 years before it officially went cold. In that time, Sandra and I put up flyers in every neighborhood in Philadelphia, and then every neighborhood in the surrounding counties. We hired 3 private investigators, none of whom found anything. We followed every lead, no matter how improbable. A tip from a psychic in Wilmington. A reported sighting in Trenton that turned out to be a different child entirely. A letter from a man in Ohio who claimed to have information and wanted money we did not have. Sandra never stopped. Not once, not for a single day, did she stop believing Michael was alive somewhere and looking for a way back to us. I stopped believing in 1996. I never told her. It seemed like the cruelest thing I could do, to say out loud that I had given up on our son. So I kept working leads during the day and stopped sleeping at night, and tried not to watch Sandra's face every time the phone rang. She left in 1993, not because she stopped loving me, or at least that is what I have always chosen to believe. Because the grief had made us into 2 people who could no longer be in the same room without drowning each other. She remarried in 96, moved to Portland. We spoke twice a year, on Michael's birthday and on October 14th, and then only once a year, and then not at all. I told James Cole all of this in the break room of the Golden Shore Casino at 2:30 in the morning, while the coffee went cold and the casino hummed beyond the door. I do not know why I told him. I had not told anyone the full version of that story in years, maybe decades. But he sat across from me, and he listened without interrupting, without offering condolences or perspective, or any of the other things people offer when they do not know what else to do with someone else's pain. He just listened. And something about the way he listened, with his whole body still, and his eyes on my face, and his hands quiet on the table, made it impossible to stop. When I finished, the room was quiet for a long time. "Tell me something," I said again. "Something not in any file." James looked down at the table. Then he looked up. "What was she wearing?" he said. "Sandra, I mean. Not the scarf. Not the boots." He paused. "What did she smell like? That day, when you got there and she was sitting on the ground and you put your arms around her. What did you smell?" My throat closed. Lavender. She had been wearing a lavender perfume she bought every Christmas from a small shop on Pine Street. She had worn it every day for as long as I had known her. I had not smelled lavender since 1993 without feeling like the ground was tilting under my feet. That detail was not in any police report, was not in any newspaper, was not something I had ever spoken aloud to another living person. James watched my face. "Tell me what she was wearing," he said softly, "and I will tell you how I know." Chapter 3. The Proof. "Lavender," I said. James did not react, did not nod, did not blink, did not show anything on his face that would tell me whether I had just confirmed something or walked into something. He simply looked at me and waited. "She wore lavender perfume," I said. "Bought it every Christmas from a shop on Pine Street. Wore it every day." I stopped. My voice had gone somewhere I did not entirely recognize. "That detail is not in any file, not in any report, not in any newspaper article. I have never said it out loud to another person in 35 years. "No," James said. "It is not in any file." "Then how do you know it?" He was quiet for a moment that stretched long enough to make the silence uncomfortable. "I don't know it the way you know things you've researched," he said finally. "I know it the way you know things that are in your body. The way you know what your house smells like when you walk in after a long time away." He looked down at his hands on the table. "I was 6 years old. Most of it is gone, but some things stayed. Smells stay longer than anything else. That is what the neurologist told me when I was older and trying to understand why certain things would hit me out of nowhere." He looked back up. Lavender was one of them. I sat with that for a long moment. 31 years of police work had given me a very reliable internal instrument for detecting deception. It was not infallible. Nothing human is. But it had served me well enough that I trusted it the way a carpenter trusts a level. And right now, sitting in a windowless break room at 2:30 in the morning, across from a man who knew things he should not be able to know, that instrument was not giving me the signal I expected. He was not lying. Or if he was doing it in a way that had bypassed every mechanism I had for detecting it, which meant either he was the most sophisticated con artist I had ever encountered, or he was telling the truth. Neither option was something I was ready to sit with alone. "I need a DNA test," I said. "Independent lab, chain of custody. Tonight if possible, tomorrow morning at the latest." James nodded as if he had been expecting exactly this. "I know a place. Keystone Genetic Services on Arch Street. They do expedited paternity testing. Results in 24 hours with proper handling." He reached into his jacket and set a business card on the table. "I already called them. They are expecting us." I looked at the card. Then I looked at him. "You called them before you came here," I said. "Yes." "You were that certain I would agree?" "No," he said. "I was that certain it was the right thing to do, regardless of what you agreed to." He paused. "I have been carrying this for 2 years. I needed to know the truth as much as you do. Maybe more." I picked up the card, turned it over, set it back down. 2 years, I said. "I did a consumer DNA test in the spring of 2023. For no particular reason. My girlfriend at the time was doing one, and I did it alongside her to keep her company. I never expected anything to come back." He stopped. Your name came up as a close family match. I spent 2 years researching before I came to find you. 2 years. The man had known my name for 2 years and had spent that time not calling, not writing, not showing up at my door. He had spent it researching, building a case, making sure before he moved. That was either the behavior of a very careful, very honorable man, or the behavior of someone running a very long and very patient con. I stood up. Let's go. The streets of Atlantic City at 3 in the morning have a particular quality of emptiness that is different from other cities at that hour. The boardwalk casinos throw light out over the ocean in wide arcs, and the blocks behind them are all shadows and wind and the occasional figure moving through a pool of streetlight. James drove. I sat in the passenger seat of a clean, unremarkable sedan and watched the city thin out into highway and thought about a 6-year-old boy in a blue coat and a lavender-scented woman sitting on the ground next to a park bench with her arms wrapped around her knees. We reached Philadelphia just after 4. Keystone Genetic Services occupied the ground floor of a narrow building on Arch Street, the kind of medical office that exists specifically to be open at hours when other medical offices are not. A technician, young, tired, professional, met us at the door and walked us through the process with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times and understood that the people sitting across from him were usually there because something enormous was at stake. The swabs took less than 4 minutes. James did not look at me during the procedure. I did not look at him. We sat on opposite sides of a small waiting room afterward while the technician processed the samples, and the silence between us was the kind that has too much inside it to be filled with words. 24 hours, the technician said when he came back out. We will have results by tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. at the latest. I stood in the parking lot afterward, in the January cold, and looked up at a sky that was starting to lighten at the edges. And I thought about what I would do if the test came back negative, how I would feel, whether I would be relieved or devastated, and what it said about me that I genuinely did not know which one I was hoping for. James stood a few feet away, hands in his jacket pockets, looking at the street. Where are you staying? I said. Hotel on Market Street. Go get some sleep, I said. I will call you when I hear from the lab. He nodded, started toward his car, then stopped without turning around. For what it is worth, he said, I have not slept well in 2 years, since the day your name came up on that screen. He was quiet for a moment. I hope that means something to you. I hope it means that whatever happens tomorrow, I did not come here lightly. He got in his car and drove away. I stood in the parking lot until the taillights disappeared. Then I got in my own car and sat there for a long time, with both hands on the steering wheel and the engine off, listening to the city wake up around me, thinking about Lavender. I did not sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee I did not drink and the photograph of Michael I had been carrying in my wallet for 35 years. And I waited for 6 o'clock in the morning to arrive. It was the longest night of my life, and I have had some long nights. At 5:58, my phone rang. Chapter 4. 98%. The technician's name was Reyes. He sounded young on the phone, and tired, and careful in the way of someone delivering information that carries weight. Mr. Briggs, he said, the results are back. 99.98% probability of a biological parent-child relationship. A pause. In practical terms, that is as close to certain as the science allows. I did not say anything. Mr. Briggs? Are you there? Yes, I said. Thank you. I hung up, set the phone on the kitchen table next to the untouched cup of coffee, looked at the photograph of Michael that I had been staring at all night. The boy in the blue coat, the birthmark just visible above the collar. 99.98%. I sat there for a long time, The kitchen light was on, and outside the window the January sky was turning the pale gray of early morning. And somewhere on my street a car started and drove away, and the world went on existing exactly as it had before, completely indifferent to the fact that everything had just changed. I called James at 6:15. "Come to the lab," I said. "Arch Street. They want us both to sign the documentation." He was already in the parking lot when I arrived, standing next to his car with his hands in his jacket pockets, watching me pull in. We walked into the building without speaking. Reyes met us at the reception desk, led us to a small office, set 2 copies of the results on the desk between us. I looked at the number on the page. 99.98. Clean black ink on white paper. 35 years reduced to a decimal point. James signed his copy first. His hand was steady. Mine was not entirely. We walked out into the January cold together. The street was quiet, just the early morning traffic beginning to build a few blocks over. I sat down on a bench outside the building because my legs had decided they were done pretending everything was fine. James sat down beside me, leaving a gap between us, and neither of us said anything for what felt like a very long time. The grief hit me in a way I had not expected. Not joy, grief. Sharp and sudden, the kind that comes when something you have been carrying so long it became part of your skeleton is suddenly, without warning, lifted away. 35 years of not knowing. 35 years of the specific torture of an open question that never closes. And now it was closed. And the relief of it felt exactly like loss. I did not cry. I am not a man who cries easily, and I was not going to start on a bench on Arch Street at 6:30 in the morning. But I sat there, with my elbows on my knees and my head down, and I breathed through it until it passed. James did not move, did not speak, did not offer anything. He simply sat beside me and let me have whatever I was having, which was exactly the right thing to do, and which told me something about him I had not expected to learn. After a while I straightened up. 35 years, I said. It was not directed at him specifically, more at the air, at the morning, at the version of myself that had spent 3.5 decades carrying a photograph in his wallet and never once stopped looking at it. I know, James said quietly. I turned to look at him. Really look, in the daylight, without the casino lighting and the 2 in the morning and the adrenaline of the initial encounter distorting everything. He had Sandra's jaw. I had not noticed that before. The angle of it, the way it set when he was keeping something contained. I had watched Sandra hold her jaw exactly that way 1,000 times. You said last night that before Newark there were other places, I said. And before that was a long story. Yes. I want to hear it, not the version you prepared, the real one. He was quiet for a moment. Then he pushed the sleeve of his jacket up and turned his left wrist toward me, palm up. There was a scar running along the inside of the wrist, about 2 inches long, silver white with age. Not a fresh wound. Old. The kind of scar that had been there long enough to become just another part of a person's landscape. I was 7 years old, he said. First winter in the house where they kept me. I figured out that the window latch in the upstairs bathroom was loose. I got it open, but the drop to the ground was farther than I thought. He looked at the scar without expression. I landed wrong. Cut my wrist on a piece of metal edging on the window frame on the way down. They found me in the yard before I got to the street. He pulled his sleeve back down. That is the short version, he said. The long version takes considerably more time and involves people and places I am not ready to talk about in a parking lot. He looked at me. But I will tell you, all of it, when the time is right. I nodded slowly. Looked out at the street where the morning was fully arriving now, the gray giving way to something slightly less gray. What happened to you after that? I said. After they found you in the yard, they moved me, he said simply. That was how it worked. Any time I became a problem, they moved me somewhere else. He paused. I stopped trying to run after the third time. It took me until I was 22 to understand that stopping was the wrong decision. We sat in silence for another moment. Then he turned to look at me with an expression I could not entirely read. Something between relief and dread. Like a man who has been carrying something heavy uphill for a very long time and can finally see the top, but is not sure what is on the other side. Dad, he said. It was the first time he had used that word. It landed somewhere in the center of my chest and stayed there. I need to tell you something, and after I tell you, you are going to want to walk away. He held my gaze. Please don't. Chapter 5. The Confession. We moved inside. James had a room on the 4th floor of a mid-range hotel on Market Street. Clean, anonymous, the kind of place that asks no questions and keeps no record of the conversations that happen inside it. He sat on the edge of the bed. I took the chair by the window. Outside, Philadelphia was fully awake now, the morning traffic thickening on the street below. Say it, I told him. He did not look away. That was something at least. I have been laundering money, he said, for an organization called the Sonora Cartel, based out of Mexico, operating up the East Coast. I have been doing it for 6 years. He paused. Moving funds through shell companies, offshore accounts, real estate transactions. I am good at it. That is not something I am proud of, but it is the truth. I kept my face neutral, the same way I had kept it neutral across 1,000 interrogation tables. It cost me more this time. How much? I said. Total volume over 6 years, somewhere north of $80 million. He looked at his hands. My cut was roughly 4%. I saved most of it, invested some, lost the rest. The last 3 words came out flat, the way people say things they have rehearsed so many times the emotion has been worn off them. I have a gambling problem. I have had one for 4 years. I am not offering that as an excuse. It is just the mechanism. How much do you owe them? $12 million. He said it the way you say a number you have repeated to yourself so many times it has stopped feeling real. I was holding funds for them. Operational money, meant to move through 3 accounts in the Caymans by the end of last quarter. I pulled from it to cover losses. They found out in November. And the deadline? 10 days from today. He looked up. Their representative made it very clear what happens after 10 days. I have seen what happens after 10 days. I have no reason to believe they are bluffing. I stood up and walked to the window. Looked down at the street without seeing it. A 63-year-old man standing in a hotel room at 7 in the morning, having a conversation he had never imagined having with a person he had never imagined finding. The trust fund, I said. Yes. I turned around. My father, I said. Harold Briggs. He set up a trust before he died. Real estate proceeds, investment accounts. Last valuation I saw was somewhere around $60 million. I watched James's face. You know about it. I found the probate records when I was researching you. He did not flinch from it. The trust has a provision. With consent of the primary beneficiary, meaning you, funds can be released early to direct biological descendants. It would require your signature and mine and a third-party legal administrator. He paused. I came here to ask you to sign. The room was very quiet. I had spent 31 years interviewing people who wanted things from me. Witnesses who wanted protection, informants who wanted immunity, suspects who wanted deals. I knew the architecture of an ask, the setup, the justification, the moment the real request finally surfaces. I had watched James Cole build toward this moment across 2 days and a DNA test and a bench on Arch Street, and a scar on his wrist. And now, here it was, clean and plain on the table between us. $12 million. 10 days. $60 million in a trust fund with my name on the release form. How long have you known about the trust? I said. Since the spring of 2023, when your name came up in the DNA results. He held my gaze. I know how that sounds. I know what you are thinking. Tell me what I am thinking. That the trust fund is the reason I am here. That the reunion, the DNA test, the bench outside the lab this morning, all of it was a setup. That I found out about the money first and built everything else around it. He was very still. I cannot prove that is not true. I cannot give you something that will make you certain of my intentions. All I can tell you is that when your name came up on that screen 2 years ago, and I started researching and found the kidnapping case, and found what happened to your wife, to Sandra, and found what my disappearance did to your family. He stopped, steadied himself. The money was not the first thing I thought about. It was not even the second. What was the first? He was quiet for a long moment. That someone should have told me, he said. That all those years, while I was being moved from place to place and told I had no family and no history, there was a man in Philadelphia putting a photograph in his wallet every morning and not giving up. His voice stayed even, but something behind his eyes did not. That was the first thing I thought about. I looked at him for a long time. Then I said, I need to think. I know. I need more than a day. I have 10 days, Walter. After that, I heard you. I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair. I will call you tomorrow morning. I moved toward the door. James did not try to stop me, but when my hand was on the handle, he spoke. There is something else, he said. Something I should have told you last night. I turned. He reached into his jacket and set a manila envelope on the bed between us. I took these over the past 3 months, he said, while I was watching you. But Walter, I am not the only person in these photographs. Chapter 6. The envelope. I sat back down, not because I had decided to. My legs made the decision independently, the way they sometimes do when the brain is processing something faster than the body can keep up with. I sat down on the edge of the chair by the window, and James set the envelope on the bed between us, and neither of us touched it for a moment. Then I picked it up and opened it. 12 photographs, 8 by 10, printed on good paper. The kind of quality that comes from a decent camera and someone who knows how to use it. The first showed me walking out of the Golden Shore Casino at the end of a shift, 7 in the morning, coat collar up against the January wind. The second caught me at a gas station on the Atlantic City Expressway. The third was taken through the window of a diner on Broad Street, where I ate breakfast on Tuesdays. I went through them slowly. James had been thorough. 3 months of coverage, different times of day, different locations across 2 states. The work of someone patient and methodical, who would learn surveillance the way you learn it when your life depends on not being caught doing it. Then I reached the 8th photograph and stopped. It showed me leaving my apartment building on Callowhill Street on a Wednesday evening, maybe 3 weeks ago. I was walking toward my car. The shot was taken from across the street, probably from a vehicle. The angle slightly elevated, the way dashboard camera shots look. James was visible in the frame. I could see the tail of his jacket at the left edge, which told me he had been positioned north of the building entrance. But there was another figure. On the opposite side of the street, south of the entrance, half in the shadow of a doorway. Different from James. Heavier build, darker coat, standing very still, in the way of someone who has been standing still for a long time and has no intention of moving until they are ready. I looked at the next photograph. Same figure, different day. Closer this time. Standing near the corner of Callowhill and Broad, hands in pockets, face angled away from the camera, but body oriented toward my building's entrance. The 11th photograph showed the figure getting into a black SUV parked on the north side of Callow Hill. No front plate visible. The rear plate was partially obscured by a crack in James's lens or a smear on his windshield, but I could make out 3 characters: P, 7, and what looked like an R. I set the photographs down on the bed in a row. "How long have they been there?" I said. "I first noticed them about 6 weeks into my own surveillance. Different schedule than mine, different vehicle each time, but the same person on foot. Always within 2 blocks of your building or your workplace." James sat down on the other side of the bed, looking at the photographs. "They are not law enforcement. The way they position is wrong for a surveillance detail. Too close, too static. Law enforcement moves. These people wait." "Cartel?" "Possibly. But the cartel knows where you live. I found your address in 40 minutes of public records searching. If they wanted to pressure you, they would have done it directly by now." He paused. "This feels like something else. Someone watching to see what happens. Waiting for an outcome." I picked up the 11th photograph again. Looked at the partial plate. P7R. 31 years on the force had left me with a residual network of people who could run plates and pull records and look into things that civilians could not look into. Most of those people were retired now. Some of them still owed me favors. "I need to make some calls," I said. "I know." James hesitated. "Walter, there is something else about that figure. The build, the way they stand, the patience of it." He looked at the photograph. "In my experience, that kind of surveillance is personal. It is not someone doing a job. It is someone with a reason." I looked at him. "You have a lot of experience with personal surveillance." "I spent 6 years working for people who considered it a basic professional skill," he said flatly. I gathered the photographs back into the envelope, stood up. My legs were steady this time. "I will call you tomorrow," I said. "Walter." I stopped at the door. "Be careful going home," James said. "Take a different route than usual. Park on a different block." He paused. "I know that sounds like standard counter-surveillance protocol," I said. "I know what it sounds like." I looked at him for a moment. "Go get some sleep." I drove back to Callow Hill Street the long way, through Fairmount and up along the river, watching my mirrors the way I had not watched them in years. No black SUV. No tail that I could identify. Either they were better than me, or they were not there tonight. My building looked the same as it always did. 6 stories of brick and aluminum windows. The intercom panel by the front door with the cracked plastic cover I had been meaning to report to the building manager for 2 years. I parked half a block north, on a side street I did not normally use, and walked back to the entrance with my hands out of my pockets and my eyes moving. Inside, I locked the deadbolt in the chain and stood in my kitchen and looked out the window at Callow Hill Street below. A black sedan was parked on the south side of the street, 40 feet from my building's entrance. Engine off, lights off. It had not been there when I left 3 days ago. I was certain of that. The way you are certain of things you have been trained to notice without knowing you are noticing them. I stood at the window for a long time. Then I picked up my phone and called a number I had not called in 4 years. Pete Garza answered on the second ring, which meant he had not been sleeping either. "Pete," I said, "I need your eyes on something. How soon can you meet?" Chapter 7. Old Ghosts. Pete Garza had been my partner for 11 years before I made lieutenant, and he stayed in the field. He was the kind of cop who never wanted to move up because moving up meant moving away from the work. And Pete loved the work, the way some men love a difficult woman, with full knowledge of what it cost him and no intention of stopping. He retired in 2019 with a bad knee and a good pension and a small house in Roxborough, where he grew tomatoes in the summer and complained about the eagles in the winter. He was waiting in his car outside my building when I came down at 7 the next morning. Same brown Buick he had driven for a decade. He handed me a coffee without being asked and pulled out into traffic without saying anything, which was how Pete communicated that he was taking something seriously. Partial plate, I said. P7R. Black sedan, probably a late-model Chevy Malibu based on the body profile in the photograph. Registered to something in the Philadelphia area. I need a full registration, and I need to know who owns the company behind it. Pete drove. You going to tell me what this is about? Not yet. He accepted that with a grunt that meant he disagreed but would wait. That was the thing about Pete. He had opinions about everything and shared them freely, but he understood the difference between a conversation and an investigation. And right now, this was an investigation. He made 3 calls from the car while he drove. Short, clipped exchanges with people whose names I did not recognize. The kind of calls that get made when you have spent 30 years building a network of people who owe you something and are finally collecting. By the time we reached the diner on Passyunk, where we used to eat lunch on Thursdays, back when we worked the same unit, he had what I needed. We sat in a corner booth. Pete set his phone on the table between us, a name pulled up on the screen. Vehicle is registered to a company called Keystone Consulting Group, LLC, he said. Delaware Incorporation, 2018. Registered agent is a law office on Chestnut Street that handles about 200 shell incorporations. No physical office, no employees on record, no public-facing business activity. He picked up his coffee. Company is a ghost, exists on paper and nowhere else. Who is behind it? Pete looked at me over the rim of his cup. That took a little more digging. The LLC has a single managing member listed in the Delaware filing. Name is Richard Holt. But Richard Holt is also a ghost. Social Security number traces back to a man who died in '97 in Harrisburg. He set the cup down. Someone built a clean identity on a dead man's number. Professional work. Not cheap. So we have nothing. I did not say that. Pete picked up his phone again and turned it to face me. On the screen was a photograph. Surveillance quality, taken at distance, showing 2 men outside a restaurant in Center City. The man on the left was heavy-set, mid-50s, wearing an expensive coat. The man on the right I recognized from a face I had spent 30 years trying to forget. My hand went flat on the table. Where did you get this? I said. Old file. 83rd District, 2012. The heavy one on the left is a mid-level cartel associate named Domingo Reyes. We ran surveillance on him for 4 months before the case got kicked upstairs to the feds. Pete tapped the screen. The man on the right was identified at the time as a civilian contact. No charges, no follow-up. Name in the file is Marcus Hale. Marcus Hale. I had not said that name out loud in years. Had not let myself say it out loud, because saying it opened something I had spent a long time learning to keep closed. Marcus Hale had been an internal affairs investigator with the Philadelphia Police Department from 1989 to 2003. In 1994, he had opened an investigation into my conduct on a narcotics case I was running in Kensington. He had presented evidence, photographs, financial records, testimony from a confidential informant, that I had accepted a bribe from a dealer I was supposed to be building a case against. The evidence was false, every piece of it. I had known it was false from the moment I saw it, and I had spent the next 2 years and most of my savings trying to prove it. And in the end, I had managed to avoid criminal charges, but not the suspension. Not the demotion, not the quiet departmental pressure that made it clear my career as a lieutenant was finished. I had retired in 2001, 3 years earlier than I had planned, with a reduced pension and a reputation that never fully recovered. I had always known someone built that case against me. I had never been able to prove who or why. I looked at the photograph on Pete's phone. Marcus Hale, standing outside a restaurant in Center City in 2012, talking to a man connected to the Sonora cartel. "Tell me everything you found on Hale," I said. Pete set the phone down. His expression had shifted into something careful and serious that I recognized from the old days, when a case had stopped being routine and started being something else. After I pulled the vehicle registration, I ran Hale's name through every system I still have access to, Pete said. He left Internal Affairs in 2003, opened a private security consultancy in Center City, does work for corporate clients, mostly financial sector. He paused. Walter, the consultancy has 3 cartel-connected entities listed as clients in incorporation documents that were filed publicly in Delaware. It is not hidden. It is just not something anyone was looking for. The diner was warm and smelled like bacon grease and old coffee, and I sat there feeling the cold spread through me anyway. He was protecting them, I said. In '94. That is why he came after me. Pete nodded slowly. You were running a Kensington narcotics case that was getting close to a distribution network with cartel connections. Someone needed you stopped. He met my eyes. Hale was the instrument. 30 years. 30 years of carrying the weight of a false accusation, of watching my career end on fabricated evidence, of knowing somewhere in the back of my mind that the truth existed, but not being able to reach it. And now here it was, sitting on a table in a diner on Passyunk Avenue over bad coffee on a January morning. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered. Mr. Briggs. The voice was flat and accented and completely without warmth. We know you have been asking questions. You have 48 hours to sign the papers. After that, we stop being patient. The line went dead. Chapter 8. The same hand. Pete drove us to a bar on South Street that he had been drinking at since 1983. Dim lighting, corner booth, a bartender named Sal who knew Pete well enough to leave a pot of coffee on the table without being asked and not come back unless called. The kind of place where serious conversations had been happening for decades, and the walls had learned to keep quiet about it. I laid it out for him, all of it. James, the DNA test, the cartel debt, the trust fund, the photographs. Pete listened without interrupting, which was how I knew he understood the weight of what I was telling him. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time, turning his coffee cup in slow circles on the table. Walk me back to '94, he said finally. You know the case. Walk me back anyway. I looked at the wall. I was 18 months into a narcotics investigation. Kensington, distribution network moving product up from South Philly. We had 3 mid-level dealers identified, working toward the supply chain. The operation was clean. I had run it by the book from day one. I stopped. In March of '94, Hale opened an internal affairs file on me. Alleged I had taken a $20,000 payment from a dealer named Curtis Webb in exchange for burying evidence. I paused. The evidence Hale presented included photographs of me meeting Webb, financial records showing a deposit to an account in my name, and testimony from a CI who said he had witnessed the exchange. All fabricated, Pete said. Every piece. The photographs were real, but the context was manufactured. Webb was a registered informant, and the meetings were documented and sanctioned. The account was opened in my name without my knowledge. The CI recanted 2 years later and then disappeared before I could use his recantation. I picked up my coffee. By then, it did not matter. The damage was done. Pete nodded slowly. And you never knew who built it. I had suspicions. Hale was the instrument, but instruments have hands behind them. I could never find the hands. I set the cup down. Until this morning. Pete reached into his coat and set a folded printout on the table. I opened it. It was a timeline, dates and names and transaction records that Pete had clearly spent the night compiling. 1988, Pete said, pointing to the first entry. Cartel Sonora establishes its first East Coast distribution network. Philadelphia is a transit hub. They need law enforcement protection to operate without interference. They approach Marcus Hale, who at that point has been in internal affairs for 3 years and has access to personnel files, disciplinary records, and ongoing investigation details for every detective in the department. He became their inside man, I said. He became their inside man. For the next 6 years, any investigation that got close to cartel operations in Philadelphia got redirected, stalled, or buried. Hale had the tools and the access to make it happen quietly. Pete moved his finger down the timeline. 1990. Your Kensington investigation starts getting close to a distribution node that feeds directly into cartel supply chains. You are 18 months in, and you have no idea what you are actually looking at. I was very still. They needed you stopped, Pete said. The killing a police lieutenant creates problems. It draws attention, brings federal involvement, disrupts the operation more than the investigation itself. So they chose a different approach. He looked at me. October 14th, 1990. Michael disappears from Fairmount Park. The bar was quiet around us. Sal was at the far end of the counter, reading a newspaper, paying no attention. It was a warning, I said. My voice came out level. I do not entirely know how. It was a warning, delivered to make you understand that your family was not safe, that continuing the investigation had consequences beyond your career. Pete's expression was careful and even, and I could see the effort it cost him to keep it that way. They did not expect what happened next. I did not stop the investigation, I said. I escalated it. You escalated it, which was not the response they anticipated. So in '94, they moved to the next option, the internal affairs case. Destroyed your career instead. That worked. I sat with that for a long moment. The whole architecture of it, the 35 years of it. Michael taken not randomly, not by strangers with no connection to anything, but deliberately, purposefully, as a message to a detective who had stumbled too close to the wrong operation without knowing it. My son had been a message I had not understood in time to stop. Where is Hale now? I said. Center City. He runs the consultancy out of an office on Walnut Street, 12th floor, corner unit. He is there most weekdays, 9 to 5. Pete folded the printout and put it back in his pocket. Walter, whatever you are thinking about doing, I'm thinking about finishing what I started in 1990, I said. Pete looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded once, the way he used to nod when we were partners, and I had made a call he did not entirely agree with, but was going to back anyway. Then you are going to need more than what we have, he said. You are going to need something that holds up. I thought about James. About $12 million and 10 days, and a man who had been raised inside the same organization that had taken him from a park in Philadelphia when he was 6 years old. I know where to get it, I said. I paid for the coffee. We walked out into the January cold, and I stood on South Street for a moment, looking at the city that had been my city for 63 years. And I thought about a boy in a blue coat, and the 35 years that had passed since someone had decided his life was a useful tool. Then I drove to James's hotel. Chapter 9. The open door. His light was still on. I could see it from the street. 4th floor, second window from the left. A warm rectangle of yellow in the dark face of the building. 2 in the morning, and James Cole was not sleeping. I was not surprised. I had not slept properly since the night he sat down across from me in a casino break room and said things that should not have been possible to say. I buzzed his room from the lobby intercom. He answered immediately, which confirmed what the light had already told me. I took the elevator up, and he was standing in the open doorway when I reached the 4th floor, still dressed, a glass of water in his hand, looking at me with the careful expression of a man who has been waiting for something and is not entirely sure whether its arrival is good news or bad. "You found something," he said. "Let me in." He stepped aside. The room looked the same as it had that morning. Bed made, jacket on the chair, nothing personal visible anywhere. The room of a man who had learned not to leave traces of himself in places he might need to leave quickly. I sat down in the chair by the window. He sat on the edge of the bed. "Marcus Hale," I said. Something moved across his face. Controlled immediately, but I caught it. "You know that name," I said. "I have heard it," he said carefully. "Through the organization. He is listed in certain internal records as a long-term asset. A law enforcement contact who has been on the cartel's payroll since the late 80s. He paused. I never had direct contact with him. He operated at a level above mine. "In 1990, Hale ordered the kidnapping of my son," I said. "As a warning, to make me stop an investigation that was getting close to cartel distribution operations in Kensington. Michael was 6 years old. He was taken from a public park on a Tuesday afternoon because I was 20 minutes away chasing the wrong lead, and someone decided that was an opportunity." I kept my voice even. "In '94, when the warning did not work, Hale destroyed my career with fabricated evidence, took my rank, my pension, my reputation. 30 years, James. 30 years I carried the weight of both of those things without knowing they came from the same source." James sat very still. "They used you," I said. "You came here thinking you had found a way out. Your father, the trust fund, a chance to pay off a debt and start over. But Hale has been watching this whole time. The black sedan outside my building, that is his people. He has known about you since before you contacted me. He let it play out because if you succeeded, the trust fund gets drained and the Morgan family legacy gets destroyed. If you failed, you end up dead, and I lose my son for the second time." I looked at him directly. Either way, Hale wins. The same way he has been winning for 35 years. The room was very quiet. James set his water glass down on the nightstand, looked at his hands, then looked up. "I did not know," he said. "I know you did not. I thought I found you. I thought the DNA test was something I did for myself, something nobody else knew about." His voice was controlled, but the effort it took was visible. "I thought for once in my life I was making a choice that was mine." "I believe you," I said. I reached into my coat and set an envelope on the bed between us. James looked at it, but did not touch it. "There is $30,000 in there," I said. "Cash. A set of car keys. The vehicle is parked on Sansom Street, 2 blocks west, full tank. Registration is clean." I paused. "I am not going to stop you. I am not going to call anyone. If you walk out of this room tonight and get in that car and drive, I will not come after you." James looked at the envelope for a long time. The room was so quiet, I could hear the building settling around us. The faint sound of traffic from the street below. The distant wail of a siren somewhere in the city. Then he pushed the envelope back across the bed toward me. "No," he said. I looked at him. 35 years ago, someone made a choice about my life without asking me," he said. "They decided where I would go and who I would be and what I would do with the years I had. Every decision I have made since I was 6 years old has been inside a frame that someone else built." He looked at the envelope and then back at me. "I am done living inside other people's frames." "James, I am not running," he said. "Not from Hale, not from the cartel, not from what I owe the people I hurt. He was very still, the way he had been still in the casino break room, but it was a different kind of stillness now. Not trained, chosen. Whatever happens next, I am going to be the one who decides it. I sat with that for a moment. Then I picked up the envelope and put it back in my coat. Then we do this together, I said. Something shifted in his face. Not relief exactly. Something quieter and more complicated than relief. The expression of a man who has been carrying something alone for a very long time and has just been offered help and is not yet sure he knows how to accept it. Together, he said. Then he looked down at his hands again, and a small line appeared between his brows. There is one more thing, he said. Something I should have told you earlier. Something that has nothing to do with the cartel or Hale or the money. He looked up. I need to show you something. Can we go somewhere tomorrow morning? There is a place I want to see. Where? You tell me, he said quietly. Where did you live? When I was small. Before everything. Chapter 10. Clement Street. We drove there in the early morning, before the city was fully awake. Clement Street in the Fairmount neighborhood sits 4 blocks west of the park, on a stretch of row houses that has not changed much since the 70s. Red brick, white marble steps, narrow front yards enclosed by black iron fencing. The kind of street that looks the same in January as it does in July, because the architecture does not depend on leaves or warmth to hold itself together. Sandra had loved it for that reason. She said it looked like a street that had made up its mind. I pulled up across from number 41 and cut the engine. James sat in the passenger seat, looking at the house through the windshield without speaking. The current owners had painted the door a deep navy blue and replaced the old iron railing on the front steps with something newer and more ornamental. Otherwise, it was the same. Same brick, same marble steps, same narrow strip of ground behind the fence where Sandra had tried and failed every spring to grow herbs. This is it, I said. James did not answer. He was looking at the house with an expression I could not entirely read. Concentrated, inward, like a man trying to tune a radio signal that keeps fading in and out. We got out of the car. The January air was cold and still. The sky the pale gray of early morning with a thin line of light beginning at the eastern edge. From somewhere down the block came the smell of coffee, a neighbor's kitchen, a window cracked despite the cold, and the sound of a distant truck on the cross street 2 blocks over. James stood on the sidewalk in front of number 41 and looked at it. He put his hands in his jacket pockets. He stood very still. I stood beside him and said nothing. This was not a moment that needed words from me. After a while, he walked slowly to the front gate. He did not open it. He put one hand on the iron latch and stood there, and I watched his face and saw something happening behind his eyes that was private and complicated and not mine to interpret. Then he closed his eyes. I waited. There was a sound, he said. His voice was quiet, directed inward more than at me. A specific sound. In the morning. Something rhythmic. He was quiet for a moment. I cannot place it. It is like trying to hold water. Take your time, I said. He stood with his eyes closed and his hand on the gate latch, and the January morning went on being cold and still around us, and the smell of coffee drifted from somewhere down the block. Then something changed in his face. A small shift, almost imperceptible, the way a sleeper's expression changes when a dream reaches the part that matters. Coffee, he said. Not the smell from down the street. Different. From inside. He opened his eyes and looked at the house. Every morning. The same time. Sandra made coffee at 6:30 every morning, I said. Without fail. Even on weekends. He nodded slowly. Not confirming information. Processing something that was already inside him. He unlatched the gate and walked up the front steps and stood on the small landing before the navy blue door. He looked at the door for a moment. Then he turned and looked back at the street from that elevation. The view from the top of the steps, 4 feet higher than the sidewalk. The row houses opposite, the parked cars, the narrow strip of winter sky between the roof lines. "I remember this view," he said. "Standing here, looking out." He paused. Someone was with me, a large hand, holding mine. I did not say anything. My throat had closed in a way that would have made speech difficult anyway. James came back down the steps and stood on the sidewalk again. He looked at the narrow passageway that ran along the left side of the building, between number 41 and number 43, leading to the small backyard. "Can we go around?" he said. I looked at the house. The current owners were presumably inside, beginning their morning. "It is 6:30 in the morning," I said. "I know." He looked at the passageway. "I just need to see the back." We went around. The passage was just wide enough for one person, and the brick on either side was damp with morning condensation. The backyard was small and rectangular, enclosed by a wooden fence that was newer than I remembered. A patio table and 2 chairs sat under a plastic cover near the back door. A bare rose bush grew along the right fence line, dormant for the winter. James stopped in the middle of the yard. He stood very still again, looking at the left corner near the back fence, where a section of concrete met a strip of soil that had probably been a garden bed at some point. He sat down on the back step, both hands on his knees, head slightly bowed. The way a man sits when something large is moving through him and he needs to let it pass. I sat down beside him. "There was a bicycle," he said. His voice had changed, quieter, further away somehow. "Blue, small, with a bell on the handlebar that did not work properly. It made a sound when you hit a bump, but not when you rang it." He looked at the left corner of the yard. "It was kept there, against the fence." The cold settled into my hands, and I did not notice it. The bicycle had been blue, a 20-inch Huffy with a silver bell that had broken 3 days after Michael got it for his 5th birthday, and that I had never gotten around to replacing. I had kept it in the backyard because the hallway was too narrow to store it inside. I had burned it in the yard in the autumn of 1996. Could not look at it anymore. Could not give it away. "How do you know about the bicycle?" I said. My voice came out very quiet. He looked at me. His eyes were wet, not crying. The tears had not fallen. Just the eyes of a man standing at the edge of something. "I don't know how I know," he said. "I just know." I nodded. We sat on the back step of a house that no longer belonged to us, in the yard where a blue bicycle had once stood against the left fence, and the January morning held itself very still around us, as if it understood that something was happening here that deserved a moment of silence. "Tell me everything you remember," I said quietly. Chapter 11. 2 soldiers. We sat on that back step for a long time. James talked. Not everything. Some things were still too far down to reach, or too recently surfaced to be put into words. But enough. Fragments mostly. A yellow kitchen. The sound of a television from another room. The specific weight of being carried up a staircase half asleep. Small things. The kind that do not make the news reports or the missing person files, but constitute the actual texture of a childhood. He spoke slowly, stopping often, and I listened without filling the silences. And by the time we stood up and walked back through the passageway to the street, the January light had strengthened into something that resembled morning. In the car, driving back toward Center City, neither of us spoke for several blocks. Then James said, "What do we do now?" "Now we work the problem," I said. He looked at me. Something in my voice had changed, and he heard it. The man who had been sitting on a back step listening to his son's memories was still there. But he had moved to one side to make room for the man I had been for 31 years. "You have a plan," James said. I have the beginning of one. My apartment was on the 4th floor of a building on Callowhill Street that I had lived in for 12 years. It was not large. A living room, a kitchen, 2 bedrooms, one of which I used as an office. But it had served its purpose. I had a desk in the office that was buried under case files and old department records and 35 years of accumulated paper. And I cleared a section of it while James made coffee in the kitchen. And by the time he came in with 2 cups, I had a yellow legal pad in front of me and a pen in my hand. "Sit down," I said. He sat. "We have 2 problems," I said. "The first is the cartel. $12 million, 9 days remaining on the deadline. The second is Hale. 30 years of protected criminal activity, a fabricated internal affairs case, and a kidnapping that was never solved." I looked at him. "We cannot address either of these problems alone. We need federal involvement." "If I walk into an FBI field office, I walk out in handcuffs," James said. "Possibly, but you walk out alive." I picked up the pen. "Right now, without federal protection, you have 9 days before the cartel collects on a $12 million debt. We both know what that collection looks like." I paused. "The FBI has resources we do not have. More importantly, they have the authority to make deals." James looked at his coffee. "What kind of deal?" "Cooperation agreement. You provide testimony and evidence against Cartel Sonora operations on the East Coast. In exchange, the government recommends a reduced sentence and provides protection." I kept my voice even. "It is not a perfect outcome, but it is an outcome where you are alive and have a future." He was quiet for a moment. "And Hale?" "Hale is a separate matter, and a bigger one. A sitting law enforcement consultant with 30 years of protected status does not go down on the word of a retired lieutenant and his recovered son. We need documented evidence, and we need it on tape." I tapped the legal pad. "That is where you come in. Hale knows you exist through the organization. He has been watching this situation develop. If you approach him directly, he will run," James said. "He will run if he thinks he has been exposed. But if he thinks you are there to negotiate, to offer him a share of the trust fund in exchange for calling off the cartel collection, he will listen. Men like Hale always listen when there is money on the table." I looked at him. "We get him talking, on tape, about the '94 case, about Michael, about his relationship with the cartel. That gives the FBI everything they need." James considered this for a long moment. "You want me to wear a wire?" "I want both of us to wear a wire. 2 simultaneous operations. You meet with the cartel representative, I meet with Hale. Same day, same time window. Federal support on both ends." I picked up my phone. "But first, I need to make a call." Pete answered on the second ring. "I need a contact," I said. "FBI, Organized Crime Division. Someone who is actually working Cartel Sonora and not just filing reports about it." Pete was quiet for a moment. "I might have someone. Diana Cross. She ran a joint task force with DEA out of the Philadelphia field office for 4 years. She transferred back to organized crime 6 months ago." He paused. "She is good, Walt. Thorough. She will listen if you have something real to bring her. Set up a meeting. Today, if possible." 3 hours later, James and I sat across a conference table on the 14th floor of the William J. Green Federal Building on Arch Street. Diana Cross was in her mid-40s, sharp-featured, with the kind of unhurried attention that comes from years of listening to people tell her things they had never told anyone else. She set a legal pad in front of her, looked at both of us, and said, "Start from the beginning." We talked for 90 minutes. Cross listened without interrupting, taking occasional notes, her expression giving nothing away. When we finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "We have been building a case against Cartel Sonora's East Coast network for 22 months, she said finally. What you have brought me today fills in 3 significant gaps I have not been able to close. She looked at James. Your cooperation would be material to this investigation. I cannot promise you a specific outcome, but I can promise you a serious conversation about terms. She looked at me. And the Hale component. If you can get him on tape admitting to the 94 fabrication and the 89 kidnapping order, that is a federal case with a very long sentence at the end of it. She set her pen down. I will need 24 hours to put together a framework, she said. Can you both be back here tomorrow morning at 9? I looked at James. He nodded once. We will be here, I said. Cross stood. She shook my hand first, then James's. She held his hand a moment longer than necessary and looked at him with an expression that was professional, but not without something human in it. Mr. Cole, she said, for what it is worth, what you are doing takes considerable courage. James looked at her steadily. I am 35 years overdue, he said. Chapter 12. The Wire. The morning of the operation, James ate nothing at breakfast. I noticed because I had made eggs and toast, and he sat at my kitchen table with a full plate in front of him, and a cup of coffee he kept lifting and setting down without drinking. I did not say anything about it. A man about to walk into a room full of people who would kill him for $12 million was entitled to skip breakfast. Cross had sent 2 technicians to the apartment at 7. They worked quickly and without small talk. The wire on James was a transmitter sewn into the lining of his jacket collar, the microphone embedded in a shirt button. Mine was a recorder built into a ballpoint pen that actually wrote, clipped to my inside breast pocket. Simple, low profile, the kind of equipment that survives a pat-down from someone who is looking for high tech. They will check you, the technician told James. Assume they will run a physical search. Do not react when they touch the jacket. The transmitter is shielded. It will not register on a standard scanner. James nodded. His face was composed in the way I had come to recognize. The trained stillness he defaulted to under pressure. The internal volume turned down to something manageable. And if they find it anyway, he said, press this. The technician set a small device on the table, flat and round, the size of a coat button. Panic signal. Response team breaches in under 60 seconds. Cross had staged 6 agents inside the restaurant. 2 as diners, 1 as a bartender, 1 as a server, 2 in a vehicle in the adjacent alley. She had 4 more positioned outside the Walnut Street building where Hale kept his office, with instructions to move on my signal. At 8:45, James put on his jacket. I walked him to the door. We stood in the hallway for a moment. You do not have to go in alone, I said. Yes, I do, he said. Reyes will not talk with a stranger at the table. He knows me. He paused. I spent 6 years building that familiarity. It is worth something today. I nodded. He looked at me for a moment with an expression I could not entirely read. Then he said, whatever happens in there, I need you to know something. The last 10 days, he stopped, steadied himself. They were worth it, even with everything. He held out his hand. I looked at his hand. Then I pulled him into a brief, solid embrace, the way men do when words have reached their limit. He was stiff for exactly 1 second, and then he was not. Come back, I said. Working on it, he said, and walked out. I gave him 20 minutes before I drove to Walnut Street. Hale's office was on the 12th floor of a glass tower between 13th and Broad. I had driven past it twice in the last week, noting the lobby layout, the elevator bank, the security desk with its single guard who checked IDs and called upstairs. I went in at 9:15, gave my name as Walter Briggs, and told the guard I was there to see Marcus Hale about a private matter. I said it was personal. I said he would want to know I was here. The guard called up. There was a pause. Then he handed me a visitor badge and directed me to the elevators. Hale's receptionist showed me into a corner office with a view of City Hall. Hale was standing at the window when I entered, which told me he had been watching the street. He turned when I came in, and I saw 30 years collapse into a single moment. The same face, older now, heavier, the hair gone gray, but the eyes exactly as I remembered them, flat and assessing, and completely without warmth. "Walter Briggs," he said. "I wondered when you would show up." "Did you?" I said. He gestured to a chair. I sat. He remained standing, which was a power move I had seen 100 times in interrogation rooms. I let him have it. "I assume this is about the boy," he said. "My son," I said. Something crossed his face. Not guilt. Men like Hale had processed guilt out of their systems decades ago. More like recalibration. "Your son has created a significant problem for a number of people," he said, including himself. "The organization he works for is not known for patience." "I know what he owes," I said. "I am here to discuss a different arrangement." Hale sat down. His interest was engaged now. I could see it in the way his posture shifted, the slight forward lean of a man who has decided the conversation is worth his time. "What kind of arrangement?" "The trust fund," I said. $60 million. My father's estate. I kept my voice even and my hands still. "There is a provision for early release to biological descendants with my authorization. I am prepared to authorize a partial release, $15 million, directly to the organization as full settlement of my son's debt. In exchange, I need certain assurances." "Assurances," Hale repeated. "That the collection deadline is extended. That my son is removed from any active threat list." I paused. "And that the 1994 Internal Affairs file is closed permanently." Hale looked at me for a long moment. Then he smiled. Small, controlled. The smile of a man who believes he is the smartest person in a room. "You have been busy," he said. "Digging around in old files, pulling threads." He leaned back. "You always were too honest to be a good cop, Walter. Honest men finish last in this business. I thought you would have learned that by now." I reached into my breast pocket and clicked the pen once. "Depends on when you start counting," I said. My phone buzzed. James. I looked down at the screen. One word. Wrong. Chapter 13. Everything goes wrong. I was out of the chair before Hale registered that I had moved. The elevator was too slow. I knew that before I reached the hallway. I took the stairwell door at the end of the corridor, pushed through, and went down 12 flights at a pace that reminded my knees exactly how old they were. My phone was already at my ear. "James is in trouble," I told Cross. "Activate." "What happened?" Her voice was immediate and focused. "I do not know yet. He sent one word. I am leaving Hale's building now." I hit the 9th floor landing and kept moving. "Do not let Hale leave that office. We have eyes on the building. He is not going anywhere." A pause. "Walter, our people at the restaurant. They just reported Reyes has moved James to the back of the building, away from our positioned agents. 8 floors. 7. How far back?" "Kitchen area. Our agent inside has limited visual. We are repositioning, but it will take 2 minutes." 2 minutes was a long time. I had learned that in Fairmount Park 35 years ago. "I am 3 minutes out," I said. "Do not breach until I get there." "Walter." 2 minutes, Cross. Give me 2 minutes. I hit the lobby at a run, which earned me a startled look from the security guard and a shout I did not stop for. The January air hit me when I pushed through the revolving door, and I was already moving west on Walnut Street, threading between pedestrians, my 63-year-old legs finding something they had not been asked for in years. The restaurant was 4 blocks away, a place called Marisol, the kind of South Philadelphia Mexican establishment that had been in the same family for 3 generations and had nothing to do with the cartel, except that Miguel Reyes used it for meetings because the owner owed a debt he had been paying in silence for 11 years. James had known this. He had sat across from Reyes at the corner table in the back dining room twice before, in his previous life, when he was still the man the cartel thought he was. I came through the front door fast. The dining room was half full. Late breakfast crowd, families mostly, a table of construction workers. Two of Cross's agents were in position as diners, both on their feet now, hands visible, watching the kitchen door at the back. The agent who had been posing as a server was moving along the far wall. "Kitchen," one of the agents said quietly as I passed. I went through the kitchen door without stopping. The kitchen was large and loud. Burners going, two cooks who flattened themselves against the counter when a stranger in a coat came through the door moving fast. Reyes was at the far end, near the back exit, with James against the wall beside him. A third man I had not seen before stood between them and the door, thick-armed, watching me with the flat attention of someone paid to watch. James was standing. Not restrained, not physically harmed, but the way he was standing. Very still, very careful, told me everything about the nature of the situation. Reyes looked at me with mild interest. He was compact, mid-40s, with an unhurried quality that came from years of being the most dangerous person in any room he entered. He was not visibly armed. That did not mean anything. "Mr. Briggs," he said. He said it the way you say the name of someone you have been briefed on. "I was wondering when you would appear." "Step away from my son," I said. Reyes tilted his head slightly. "Your son has placed himself in a complicated position. He owes a significant debt. The timeline for that debt ends today." He looked at James briefly. "We were discussing resolution options." "The resolution is already in process," I said. "Federal agreement. His cooperation for a reduced sentence and full immunity from your organization's collection activities. The paperwork is being finalized as we speak." I kept my voice even and my hands at my sides. "The men outside this building are not going to wait much longer." Reyes was quiet for a moment. His eyes moved to the kitchen door behind me, calculating. The thick-armed man had shifted his weight, which meant his hands were free, and he was about to do something with them. I looked at him directly. "Do not," I said. He looked back at me with the flat expression of a man receiving instructions he had not decided whether to follow. Reyes said something in Spanish, low and quick. The thick-armed man went still. "The debt," Reyes said to me. $12 million is not a paperwork problem." "No," I said. "It is a federal problem. And the men who are about to come through that door are very good at federal problems." I held his gaze. "You have approximately 45 seconds to decide whether this ends here or somewhere considerably worse." The kitchen was very quiet for a moment that stretched. Then the back door came open, and Cross walked in with 4 agents behind her. Badges visible, hands on weapons not yet drawn, and the room reconfigured itself around the new reality, in the way rooms do when authority walks in and fills all the available space. Reyes looked at me one more time. Then he put his hands up, slowly, deliberately, without expression. The thick-armed man followed. James pushed off from the wall and walked toward me. He was steady on his feet, which was more than I had been certain of 30 seconds ago. He stopped in front of me and looked at my face, and I looked at his, and neither of us said anything because there was too much to say, and the kitchen was filling up with federal agents, and it was not the time. Then he said, "Hale." "Handled," I said. "Cross has people on the building." He nodded. Then he exhaled. A long, slow release. The kind of breath a man takes when something he has been bracing against for a very long time has finally, at cost, resolved itself. "Okay," he said quietly. "Okay." Chapter 14. 30 years overdue. Cross's people had Hale in handcuffs by the time I got back to Walnut Street. He was standing in the lobby of his building when I walked in. Not in his office, not being dragged down in an elevator, but standing in the marble lobby between 2 federal agents with his wrists secured behind him and his face arranged into the careful blankness of a man who has decided to give nothing away. The building's security guard was off to one side, looking at the floor. 3 other agents were moving in and out of the elevator bank, carrying document boxes. Hale looked at me when I walked through the door. He did not say anything. Neither did I. We looked at each other across the lobby for a moment. 30 years of accumulated history in the space between us. And then, one of the agents touched Hale's arm and walked him toward the door. Cross met me near the reception desk. She had a recorder in her hand, already rewound. "The pen caught everything," she said. "His exact words, the 1994 file, his role in building the case against you, his relationship with the cartel going back to '88. She paused. He also mentioned, without prompting, that the 1990 operation in Fairmount Park was sanctioned at his level. He used the phrase authorized interference. He seemed to think he was negotiating. She looked at me steadily. He was not negotiating. "No," I said. "He was not." She set the recorder on the desk between us and pressed play. Hale's voice came out of the small speaker, flat and self-assured. The voice of a man who had been protected for so long, he had forgotten what unprotected felt like. I listened to 30 seconds of it. Long enough to hear my name. Long enough to hear 1994. Long enough to hear him say the word authorized. And then I asked Cross to stop it. "That is enough," I said. She stopped it. "The Internal Affairs Division will open a formal review of the '94 case within the week," Cross said. "Based on what we have, the fabricated evidence should be formally vacated within 60 days. Your record will be corrected." She paused. "I cannot give you back 30 years, Walter, but I can give you a clean file." I nodded, looked at the document boxes being carried out of Hale's office. 30 years of records. 30 years of protected criminality. 30 years of a man operating behind a false wall of institutional credibility. "What does he face?" I said. "Conspiracy to commit kidnapping, obstruction of justice, racketeering, bribery of a public official." Cross counted them off without pleasure. "The kidnapping charge alone carries a federal mandatory minimum of 20 years. He is 61 years old." She did not need to complete that sentence. I walked to the elevator and rode up to the 12th floor alone. The agents had left Hale's office open. I stood in the doorway and looked at the corner office with its view of City Hall. The desk, the bookshelves, the framed commendations on the wall from organizations that had trusted a man who had never deserved their trust. A floor-to-ceiling window behind the desk caught the winter light and threw it across the carpet in a long, pale rectangle. I stood there for perhaps 2 minutes, not thinking anything in particular, just standing in the space where 30 years of damage had been administered from, letting the fact of it settle into something I could carry. Then I went back down. Pete was outside on the sidewalk when I came out, his brown Buick idling at the curb. He had been there since morning, running coordination through his network of retired contacts, the invisible infrastructure that had made today possible. He looked at me when I came through the door, and I gave him a small nod. And he closed his eyes for 1 second in a way that told me everything about what the day had cost him, too. "How is the boy?" he said. "Safe," I said. "Cross has him." Pete nodded. We stood on the sidewalk together for a moment, 2 old cops in the January cold, not needing to say anything more than that. The call from the Philadelphia Police Department came 3 days later. A lieutenant from the commissioner's office, formal and careful in the way of someone delivering a message they have been specifically instructed to deliver correctly. He informed me that the Internal Affairs Review Board had conducted a preliminary examination of the 1994 case file and found substantial evidence of fabrication and misconduct. A formal hearing was being scheduled. My record would be corrected pending the outcome. He said the commissioner wanted me to know personally. I thanked him and hung up. I sat at my kitchen table for a while after that. The same table where I had sat 3 weeks ago with a cup of coffee going cold and a photograph of Michael in my wallet. And nothing to look forward to except another Monday. A young officer came to my apartment the following afternoon. Fresh-faced, maybe 26, in a dress uniform that still had the newness in it. He was carrying something in a small evidence bag, handled with both hands, the way you carry something that matters. He set it on my kitchen table. Inside the bag was a police badge. Gold, shield-shaped, with the number 471 engraved beneath the Philadelphia seal. My number. The badge that had been surrendered in 1994 in a conference room on the 3rd floor of the Roundhouse, while a man I now knew to be a criminal watched with satisfaction. "The commissioner sends his regards," the young officer said. "He said it is yours. Always was." I looked at the badge for a long time. Then I picked up the evidence bag, turned it over in my hands once, and set it back down on the table. "Tell the commissioner I appreciate it," I said. "But I do not need it anymore." The young officer looked uncertain, as if he had not prepared for this response. "I have something else now," I said. "Something that matters more." After he left, I stood at the kitchen window and looked out at Callow Hill Street in the January afternoon, and thought about James, who was 3 blocks away in a federal holding facility, being processed through the first stage of the cooperation agreement. And I thought about the 35 years that had passed since a man named Marcus Hale had decided that a 6-year-old boy was a useful instrument. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt something that was not anger, and was not grief, and was not the specific exhaustion of carrying an open question for decades. I felt like a man who had finished something. Chapter 15. What Justice Costs. Cross laid it out the way she laid everything out. Clearly, without softening, with the kind of directness that respected the intelligence of the people in the room. James sat across the conference table from her, with his hands folded in front of him. I sat to his left. A federal public defender named Ellison, young, competent, already familiar with the case file, sat to his right. Outside the windows of the 14th floor, Philadelphia was going about its afternoon without any awareness of what was being decided inside this room. "The government's position," Cross said, "is as follows. In exchange for full cooperation, testimony against Cartel Sonora's East Coast network, documentation of financial structures and operational contacts, and a guilty plea on 3 counts of money laundering, we will recommend to the court a sentence of 15 years with eligibility for parole after 10. She paused. "Without cooperation, you are looking at federal racketeering charges that carry a mandatory minimum of 20 years, with the money laundering counts running consecutively. That is a very long time, Mr. Cole." James looked at the table, then at Cross. "And the cartel? After I testify, witness protection is available to you and will be strongly recommended. New identity, relocation, monitoring for a minimum of 5 years post-release." She held his gaze. "I will not tell you the risk disappears entirely. I will tell you we take it seriously." James was quiet for a moment. Ellison said something about reviewing the specific language of the plea agreement, about timeline for filing, about procedural steps. The words moved through the room and settled into the carpet without disturbing anything essential. What was essential was the thing sitting in the silence between the legal language. The fact of it, plain and irreducible. 15 years. A decade of eligibility. A man who was 41 years old doing the arithmetic of what he would be when he walked out. James looked at me. I did not tell him what to do. That was not my place, and we both understood it. But I held his gaze, and I did not look away. And whatever he read in my face was whatever was true in my face, which was that I would be there regardless of what he decided, and that some things could not be fixed, but could be stood beside. "I will take the agreement," James said. Cross nodded once. Ellison began making notes. We were done in 40 minutes. Outside on the sidewalk afterward, James stood in the January cold with his hands in his pockets and looked at the street. He had 24 hours before he was required to surrender to federal custody. Cross had been specific about that. 24 hours, voluntary surrender, 9 o'clock tomorrow morning at the Federal Building on Arch Street. "What do you want to do tonight?" I said. He thought about it for a moment. "Eat somewhere," he said. "Somewhere that is not a hotel room or a conference room." He paused. "Somewhere normal." We went to a place on South Street that had been there since I was in my 30s. A corner restaurant with red vinyl booths and a menu that had not changed significantly in 20 years, and a noise level that made conversation possible without making it mandatory. We ordered without much discussion. The food came. We ate. For a while we talked about small things. The neighborhood, the cold, the way Philadelphia felt different in January than it did in any other month. James had opinions about cities. He had lived in 7 of them, he said, and each one had a different quality of loneliness. And Philadelphia's was particular to itself. Something in the brick and the gray sky, and the way people walked with their heads slightly down against the wind. I listened to him talk and watched his face, and thought about the 6-year-old boy in the blue coat, and how many versions of himself he had been required to become between that park and this restaurant, and what it cost a person to survive that many reinventions, and whether any of them had ever felt like a choice. After the plates were cleared, he wrapped both hands around his coffee cup and looked at me. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yes." "Did you ever think about just letting it go? After Sandra left, after the department, did you ever think, enough, I am done carrying this?" I considered the question seriously, the way it deserved to be considered. "Yes," I said, "more than once. There were years when I came very close." I looked at my coffee. But I could not figure out how to put it down. It was not nobility. It was more like I did not know who I was without it. The looking was the only thing that stayed constant. James nodded slowly. "I did not know you existed until 2 years ago," he said. "And when I found out, the first thing I felt was angry." He looked up. "Not at you, just angry that there had been a version of my life where none of it happened. Where I grew up on Clement Street and learned to ride that bicycle, and had a mother who wore lavender." He paused. "That version felt more real to me than the one I actually lived. And I had never even seen it." The restaurant went on around us. Other tables, other conversations, the ordinary noise of people eating dinner on a winter evening. "After all of this," James said quietly, "after everything we have done in the last 2 weeks, do you think there is anything left worth saving?" I looked at him across the table. My son, 41 years old, facing 15 years, carrying the weight of a life that had been shaped by other people's cruelty from the age of 6. "I think," I said slowly, "that is exactly what we are about to find out." He held my gaze for a moment. Then he nodded. Something settled in his face. Not peace, not yet, but the beginning of something that might become peace, if given enough time and enough mornings. We sat there until the restaurant began to empty around us. Neither of us was in a hurry to end the night. We both knew what tomorrow morning looked like. Chapter 16. The visiting room. The visiting room at FCI Cumberland smelled like disinfectant and recycled air, and something underneath both of those things that I could not name but recognized. The specific institutional quality of a place where time moves differently than it does outside. I had been coming every month since June. This was the 6th visit. I signed in at the front desk, surrendered my phone and my keys, passed through the security checkpoint, and followed a corrections officer down a corridor that I now knew well enough to navigate without watching where I was going. James was already at the table when I came in. 6 months had changed him in ways I was still learning to read. He was thinner than he had been in January, but not unhealthily so. The thinness of a man whose days were structured, and whose meals were regular, and whose body had settled into the rhythm of the place. He was wearing the standard khaki uniform with the sleeves rolled to the elbow. He sat straight in the plastic chair, which was something I had noticed from the first visit. He always sat straight, like a man who had decided that posture was one of the things still within his control. He looked up when I came in, and something in his face did what it did every month. A small, involuntary shift, like a door opening a crack before the owner remembers to be careful. He was getting less careful about it. I took that as a good sign. I sat down across from him. "You look tired," he said. "I drove 2 hours," I said. "I am tired." "You could stay closer. There are hotels in Cumberland." "I know," I said. "I prefer to drive back." He accepted this without pressing it, which told me he understood that the drive was part of it. The 2 hours each way, the act of making the distance deliberate, the choice to come and go rather than make it easier on myself. Some things needed to cost something to mean what they meant. "How is Pete?" he said. "Complaining about his knee, growing tomatoes, the usual." I set a small paper bag on the table between us, the approved items from the facility's permitted list that I brought every month. Paperback books mostly, a legal pad, 2 pens. James had started taking a paralegal correspondence course in September. He was 3 months in and, according to his case manager, doing well enough that she had mentioned it to the education coordinator unprompted. "Cross called me last week," I said. He looked up. "The Cartel Sonora trial date has been set for April. She wanted you to know the prosecution team is confident. Your testimony, combined with the financial documentation, is substantial." I paused. "She also said to tell you that the 3 additional network members who were identified based on your cooperation were arrested in October. She seemed to think you would want to know that." James nodded slowly. He looked at the legal pad for a moment. "Does it help?" he said. "Knowing that?" "I think it does," I said. "Not immediately, but eventually." He considered that. Outside the visiting room, somewhere in the facility, a door opened and closed, and the sound of it echoed down the corridor briefly and then was gone. "Tell me about the foundation," he said. I had been waiting for this. Every month he asked, and every month I told him what was new. And every month something was new, because the foundation had grown faster in its first 6 months than anything I had planned for. "We took on 11 new cases in October," I said. "Missing children, primarily, with 3 trafficking-related referrals from a partner organization in Baltimore." I set my hands on the table. "The investigative team identified a child in the Kensington area last month who had been missing for 14 months. She is home now." I paused. "Her mother sent a letter to the office. I have been carrying it in my coat for 3 weeks because I cannot figure out what to do with it." James looked at me with an expression I had come to recognize over 6 months of monthly visits. The expression of a man who is finding out, incrementally, what it feels like to be connected to something good. "Read it to me," he said. I reached into my coat and took out the letter. It was handwritten, 2 pages, the handwriting uneven in the way of someone who does not write by hand often, but wanted to do this by hand because it mattered. I read it to him slowly, all of it, including the parts that were difficult to read without my voice doing something I would have preferred it not do. When I finished, the room was quiet for a moment. "That is why you named it Michael," James said. "Yes, not just because of me," he said. "Because of all of them." "Because of all of them," I agreed. "You were the reason I started looking. They are the reason I kept going." James looked at the letter in my hands. Then he looked at the table. His jaw was set in the way Sandra's used to set when she was keeping something contained. And I waited, because I had learned over 6 months that James needed time to reach the things that mattered most to him. "I remembered something else," he said finally. "From Clement Street." I set the letter down on the table, folded my hands. "It came to me last week," he said. "In the morning. I was not thinking about anything in particular. It just arrived." He looked up. "A sound. From inside the house. Early, before I was fully awake." He paused. Someone was whistling. Chapter 17. The song he never forgot. I looked at him across the table. "Whistling," I said. "Yes." He kept his eyes on the table, the way he did when he was reaching for something that kept moving away from him. "Early morning, before the house was fully awake. The same song, always the same. I did not know what it was. I still do not know the name of it." He paused. "But I have been hearing it in my head for as long as I can remember. In different houses, different cities, different years. Always the same melody. I used to think it was something my brain had invented." He looked up. "Was it real?" I could not answer for a moment. The song had no name that I knew. It was something Sandra had heard on the radio when we were first married. A melody from a film score, something instrumental and unhurried. And she had hummed it so often in those early years that I had learned it without trying to. After Michael was born, I started whistling it in the mornings while I made coffee and eggs. The way you carry music you have absorbed so deeply, it no longer requires conscious thought. Every morning, without exception. 6:30, kitchen, the same song. I had not whistled it since October of 1990. "Yes," I said. It was real. James closed his eyes. Just for a moment. The kind of closing that is not sleep, but something more like arrival. A man reaching the end of a very long journey and needing one moment to register that the ground beneath him has finally stopped moving. When he opened them, he looked at me with an expression I had no word for. Not relief, not grief, not joy. Something that contained all three and was larger than any of them individually. The expression of a person who has spent their entire life with a piece missing and has just found it in the last place they thought to look. "I used to hum it," he said. "The people I lived with thought I had made it up. I thought I had made it up." A small pause. 35 years of carrying a song that belonged to someone else's kitchen. "It belonged to yours, too," I said. "It was always yours." The visiting room was very quiet around us. Other tables, other conversations, the low institutional murmur of the place, all of it receded until there was only the table and the two of us, and the distance between us that was and was not a distance at all. I thought about Sandra, about the mornings on Clement Street when the kitchen light was yellow and the coffee was on, and Michael was still sleeping upstairs, and Sandra was reading at the table, and I was at the stove whistling a song neither of us knew the name of. I thought about how ordinary it had been, how completely ordinary, the way the best things always are until they are gone, and you understand what they were. I wished she could have been here. I wished it the way you wish for things that cannot be undone. Quietly, without anger, just the simple fact of the wish, and the understanding that some absences are permanent, and must be carried rather than resolved. She would have liked you, I said. Sandra. She had a way of seeing through the surface of people to what was underneath. She would have seen you very clearly. I paused. She would have been proud of what you were doing in here. The paralegal course, the testimony, the choice you made in that hotel room. I looked at him steadily. I am proud of it. James looked at his hands on the table. The scar on his left wrist was visible. The old one, from the window frame at age 7. Silver white and permanent. He did not cover it. He had stopped covering it, I had noticed, sometime around the third visit. Small things marked progress. 10 years, he said. If the parole board considers the cooperation agreement. 10 years, I agreed. I will be 51. I will be 73, I said. I plan to be here. He looked up at that. Something moved across his face that was not quite a smile, but occupied the same space a smile would have occupied. Every month? He said. Every month, I said. And when you get out, there will be a place at the foundation for someone who understands what it costs a family to lose someone and what it takes to find them again. I held his gaze. That knowledge is worth something, James. Everything you have been through, it is worth something. Not enough to justify what happened. Nothing justifies what happened. But enough to do something with. He was quiet for a long time after that. The corrections officer at the door glanced at the clock. 10 minutes remaining. Will you whistle it for me sometime? James said. The song. Next month, I said. He nodded. Looked at the table once more, then back at me. Okay, he said quietly. Next month. The drive back to Philadelphia took 2 hours through the Maryland and Pennsylvania hills, the January light fading early the way it does in winter, the highway emptying out as the evening came on. I drove without the radio, which was something I had started doing on these drives. The silence after the visit felt necessary, like the quiet after music, something that needed to be honored rather than filled. I thought about a 6-year-old boy in a blue coat. I thought about a man sitting straight in a plastic chair in a khaki uniform, learning paralegal procedure and carrying a song he had never known the name of. I thought about Sandra at the kitchen table and the way morning light had fallen across the floor of a house on Clement Street, and how some things survive the people who made them and find their way home through channels no one could have predicted. I was not a man who believed in fate. I had said that at the beginning, and it remained true. What had happened to my family was not the universe's plan. It was the result of a corrupt man's greed and a criminal organization's reach, and 35 years of consequences that had touched everyone in their path. But something had come back. Not whole, not undamaged, not the way it would have been if none of it had happened. Something different. Something that had been forged in the damage rather than despite it. I pulled off the highway at the Callow Hill exit as the last of the daylight disappeared behind the city skyline. The streets were quiet. My building was where I had left it. I parked and sat in the car for a moment before going in. For the first time in 35 years, I was not driving home to an empty house. I was driving home to a life that had something in it worth driving toward. That was enough. For now, that was more than enough. If this story stayed with you, if something in Walter's journey, or James's, or the long road between loss and finding touched something in your own life, I would be grateful to hear from you. Leave a comment below. Tell me what it brought up. Tell me where you are watching from. Tell me what you are still carrying and what you have managed to put down. Stories like this one exist because people like you believe that the difficult things are worth telling. If someone you know needs to hear that what was lost can sometimes be found, not perfectly, not without cost, but genuinely, please share this with them. And if you want to hear more stories about the things that make us human, the losses, the searches, the unexpected arrivals, then stay with us. There is more to tell. 7 months after Hale was sentenced to 23 years at a federal penitentiary in Virginia, I drove back to Clement Street one last time. Not for James. Not for the foundation. Just for me. I parked where I always used to park. 2 houses down, driver's side facing the old oak that Sandra planted the spring before Michael was born. The tree was enormous now. What had been a sapling the height of my knee was taller than the roofline, branches spreading wide over the sidewalk like it had decided, on its own, to protect everything beneath it. I sat in the car for a long time. I thought about the night in 1990 when I drove this same route, and everything I believed about my life was still intact. My badge, my marriage, my son. I thought about 1994, sitting in a hearing room while a man I trusted read fabricated evidence into the official record. I thought about the years between then and now. The casino floor at 2 in the morning, the smell of stale coffee, a stranger sitting across from me who had my wife's jawline and my father's stubborn eyes. I thought about a blue bicycle with a broken silver bell. I got out of the car and walked to the front door. The current owners, a young couple with a toddler, had painted it red. I stood on the sidewalk and looked at it for a moment, and I didn't feel the grief I expected. What I felt was something quieter, something close to peace. The foundation had 17 active cases that week. 3 of them involved children under the age of 10. James had enrolled in a paralegal program at Cumberland. He called every Sunday at 9. Pete had retired for real this time. He sent me a photo from a fishing trip in Montana, worst catch I'd ever seen. And he looked happier than I'd seen him in 30 years. I whistled the old song on the walk back to my car, the one James remembered from Clement Street, the one I had carried in my chest for 35 years without knowing where it came from. The oak tree moved in the wind. I drove home. Before we close, I want to sit with you for a moment. Not as a narrator, but as someone who has thought hard about what Walter's journey really means. Because this isn't just a story about a kidnapping, a cartel, or a corrupt investigator. Those are the bones. What lies beneath is something else entirely. The first lesson is this: grief does not expire. Walter carried the weight of his son's disappearance for 35 years. He didn't move on. He didn't find closure. He got up every morning, put on his uniform, first a badge, later a casino blazer, and kept moving. If you are carrying something heavy right now, something other people have told you to simply get over, know this: there is no deadline on grief. What matters is that you don't let it become a reason to stop showing up. The second lesson: the truth is patient. It waited 35 years for Walter. In a DNA sequence, in a star-shaped scar, in the scent of lavender, in the memory of a morning whistle. The men who buried the truth built elaborate structures to keep it hidden. None of it held. Truth does not need your permission to survive. It only asks that you don't abandon it when it becomes inconvenient. The third lesson: justice and forgiveness are not the same thing, and you don't have to choose one to have the other. Walter did not forgive Hale. He doesn't need to. But he also didn't let the pursuit of justice consume what little time he had left. He filed the evidence, stepped back, and walked away from the badge that was offered to him. Not in bitterness, but because he had found something worth far more than the institution that once failed him. The fourth lesson is about second chances, the real kind. Not the easy kind where everything resets and the pain disappears. James Cole will serve at least 10 years before his first parole hearing. He calls every Sunday. He is studying law inside a federal prison. That is not a happy ending. That is a real ending. Real second chances are imperfect, incomplete, and built slowly on the rubble of what was broken. And the fifth, perhaps the most important: the people you've lost never fully leave. Sandra's lavender perfume, Harold Briggs's trust, put in place before Walter ever knew he would need it. Michael's blue bicycle, still waiting in the backyard after 35 years. The dead have a quiet way of continuing to protect the living, if we are willing to pay attention. If this story moved something in you, if any part of Walter's journey reflected something in your own life, I'd like to hear from you. Tell me in the comments, what is the one thing you are still holding on to that you haven't been able to let go? And if you want to hear more stories like this one, Stories about ordinary people facing impossible choices. Make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell, because the next story begins exactly the way this one did, with a stranger and a secret they've been carrying for years. 7 months after Hale was sentenced to 23 years at a federal penitentiary in Virginia, I drove back to Clement Street one last time. Not for James, not for the foundation, just for me. I parked where I always used to park, 2 houses down, driver's side facing the old oak that Sandra planted the spring before Michael was born. The tree was enormous now. What had been a sapling the height of my knee was taller than the roofline, branches spreading wide over the sidewalk like it had decided on its own to protect everything beneath it. I sat in the car for a long time. I thought about the night in 1990, when I drove this same route, and everything I believed about my life was still intact. My badge, my marriage, my son. I thought about 1994, sitting in a hearing room while a man I trusted read fabricated evidence into the official record. I thought about the years between then and now. The casino floor at 2 in the morning, the smell of stale coffee. A stranger sitting across from me who had my wife's jawline and my father's stubborn eyes. I thought about a blue bicycle with a broken silver bell. I got out of the car and walked to the front door. The current owners, a young couple with a toddler, had painted it red. I stood on the sidewalk and looked at it for a moment, and I didn't feel the grief I expected. What I felt was something quieter, something close to peace. I don't pray often, never have. But standing there on that sidewalk, I looked up at the sky and said thank you. Because only God could have written something this impossible and called it true. The foundation had 17 active cases that week. 3 of them involved children under the age of 10. James had enrolled in a paralegal program at Cumberland. He called every Sunday at 9. Pete had retired for real this time. He sent me a photo from a fishing trip in Montana. Worst catch I'd ever seen. And he looked happier than I'd seen him in 30 years. I whistled the old song on the walk back to my car. The one James remembered from Clement Street. The one I had carried in my chest for 35 years without knowing where it came from. The oak tree moved in the wind. I drove home. Before we close, I want to sit with you for a moment. Not as a narrator, but as someone who has thought hard about what Walter's journey really means. Because this isn't just a story about a kidnapping, a cartel, or a corrupt investigator. Those are the bones. What lies beneath is something else entirely. The first lesson is this: grief does not expire. Walter carried the weight of his son's disappearance for 35 years. He didn't move on. He didn't find closure. He got up every morning, put on his uniform, first a badge, later a casino blazer, and kept moving. If you are carrying something heavy right now, something other people have told you to simply get over, know this: there is no deadline on grief. What matters is that you don't let it become a reason to stop showing up. Sometimes God's timing looks nothing like what we planned, and everything like what we needed. The second lesson: the truth is patient. It waited 35 years for Walter, in a DNA sequence, in a star-shaped scar, in the scent of lavender, in the memory of a morning whistle. The men who buried the truth built elaborate structures to keep it hidden. None of it held. Truth does not need your permission to survive. It only asks that you don't abandon it when it becomes inconvenient. The third lesson: justice and forgiveness are not the same thing. And you don't have to choose one to have the other. Walter did not forgive Hale. He doesn't need to. But he also didn't let the pursuit of justice consume what little time he had left. He filed the evidence, stepped back, and walked away from the badge that was offered to him. Not in bitterness, but because he had found something worth far more than the institution that once failed him. The fourth lesson is about second chances. The real kind. Not the easy kind, where everything resets and the pain disappears. James Cole will serve at least 10 years before his first parole hearing. He calls every Sunday. He is studying law inside a federal prison. That is not a happy ending. That is a real ending. Real second chances are imperfect, incomplete, and built slowly on the rubble of what was broken. And if God can take 35 years of loss and turn it into 17 missing children cases and a son who studies law behind bars, then maybe none of it was wasted after all. And the fifth, perhaps the most important, the people you've lost never fully leave. Sandra's lavender perfume. Harold Briggs's trust, put in place before Walter ever knew he would need it. Michael's blue bicycle, still waiting in the backyard after 35 years. The dead have a quiet way of continuing to protect the living, if we are willing to pay attention. If this story moved something in you, if any part of Walter's journey reflected something in your own life, I'd like to hear from you. Tell me in the comments, what is the one thing you are still holding on to that you haven't been able to let go? And if you want to hear more stories like this one, stories about ordinary people facing impossible choices, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell, because the next story begins exactly the way this one did, with a stranger and a secret they've been carrying for years.